Okay, so welcome everybody. It's a packed house.
You've got a great audience.
Yeah, so my name is Matt Doherty. You know me, Julia, and Daniel knows me too. So we're going to be talking about Pesticide Use Enforcement 101 today. And I originally made this talk to be kind of an introduction for growers that have never had to deal with pesticides before or any kind of pesticide regulation. So I designed the talk to be very introductory and basic and not get too convoluted with stuff.
Great.
And I think I did a pretty good job of that. So in your packet, there's a couple things. There's a copy of the presentation. There's a sheet on what is a pesticide. I'm going to go into that a little bit in more detail. So there's that. There's a sheet on pesticide use on cannabis. This is put out by DPR, and it's basically, if you wanted to try to fit pesticide use on one page, they did that here. So, and also a sheet on California restricted materials. This is just kind of an info sheet. Growers aren't able to use restricted materials, but I figured it'd be good for people to have anyway.
Yeah, so they know that they can't use it.
Yeah. So let's get started here. So the goals for today are, the first one is to first gain an understanding of what we do as the Ag Commissioner's Office and how we fit in as a regulatory agency, specifically with pesticide use, and then also to begin to understand some of the many requirements that growers are going to be expected to follow if they're using pesticides on their cannabis. And you'll find that there's a lot of laws and regs, and they can be pretty complex. So the outline, I'm going to first talk about our office and how we work as a regulatory agency. Then I'm going to go into the federal pesticide laws, and then also the state pesticide laws. And then the bulk of the talk is going to be the requirements of growers when they use pesticides. So more specifically, licensing and certification, permitting, training, and then basic pesticide operations. So just real quick, the County Ag Commissioner system, it's a pretty unique system in the nation. Most states have one ag department for the whole state. So like Oklahoma will have the Oklahoma Ag Department. California is different in that we do have the CDFA, but each county has its own Ag Commissioner's Office. And this is for a couple reasons. One is that California is a pretty large state, so it would be tough for one location to regulate the whole state, but also that California is very diverse, and over 400 different crops grown. Each county is different, so it kind of needs each county needs its own ag department to regulate the laws in their own county, because like San Diego is going to be a lot different than Mendocino County. So
yeah, no one knows Mendocino County better than Mendocino County resident.
exactly. Yep. So that's just kind of interesting. I don't think any other states do that. Like we're the only one that does that. I think New York might do it, but I think we're the only one. So what do we do? In a nutshell, we enforce all the laws and regs outlined in the Food and Ag Code and the Code of Regulations and the Business and Professions Code. So
I have a question about that.
yeah.
Is cannabis the only business and profession code, or is there another agricultural crop that it falls under?
No. So the other thing we regulate in the Business and Professions Code is the weights and measures.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good segue. So not only do we do the ag stuff, but we do all the weights and measures, check all scales, gas stations, propane, cattle scales. For the agricultural side of things, we do nursery inspections. We inspect farmers markets. We regulate the farmers markets, make sure they're following all their laws and regs. Regulate sudden oak death. We have a whole program for that. But today, we're here to talk about one of our bigger programs, and that's called the Pesticide Use Enforcement. So it's called PUE. So when you hear me say PUE, it's what I'm talking about. It's Pesticide Use Enforcement. And we spend a lot of time on this program. So that we do things like headquarters inspections. We go and check people's records.
What do you mean by headquarters?
So we go out to people's farms and check and see if they have their proper training records, use reports, make sure they're storing things properly, things like that. It's a big laundry list of regs that we check. We do surveillance of pesticide applications. So we basically drive around and go and see if people are spraying, and we'll stop and make sure they're following all the laws and regs. We issue permits for use reporting and also restricted materials permits because you have to do monthly use reporting if you're spraying ag commodity with pesticides. We give continuing education to our growers, what this is right here, what we're doing right now. And we also are in charge of investigations of pesticide illnesses. So if someone thinks that they got, if they drove through a drift of a spray and they think they might have got ill, or they got hurt on the job, or they think they got poisoned, they could contact us and we will do an investigation at that point to see if there was any wrongdoing, or if it was an accident, or if a fine needs to be levied. So Daniel, Julia,
Yes,
since we're talking about pesticides, I want to ask you, when you hear the word pesticide, what do you think? What comes to mind? Anything? Definition or
Chemicals,
chemicals?
but it's really not just chemicals.
Okay.
I think that's the typical
Yeah.
response from most people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I give out these to all of my retainer clients who use neem oil or any kind of foliar spray for prevention or nutrients.
Okay.
Just so they know that they need to, and I tell them to come in here and register.
Okay. Yeah, generally, you're right. It's kind of a bad chemical type of thing people think of. But, legally, so the definition of a pesticide is, A is any spray adjuvant. So a spray adjuvant is something that you put in with the pesticide and makes it stick better to the plant, makes it spread better. Also, any substance, mixture of substances which is intended to be used for defoliating plants, regulating plant growth. Can you think of anything that's used to regulate plant growth that's used commonly in the industry? Nurseries use it a lot.
I think a lot of people use it a lot. I don't work with a lot of those people.
Rooting hormones?
Rooting hormones.
Oh, really? Rooting hormones is
Yeah,
that?
so rooting hormones are considered pesticides.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and if you look on the labels of rooting hormones, they should have an EPA reg number.
Okay.
So that's not like a bad thing. I mean,
no,
it's
just
just
nobody knows.
yeah, that's why we're trying to give these classes. And also for
So I have
preventing.
a lot of clients that use rooting hormones.
Yeah, well, I think most people do. Yeah.
I use it.
Or it's any substance for preventing, destroying, repelling, mitigating any pests which may infest or be detrimental to vegetation, man, animals, etc.
Yeah.
Right. So anything that kills any pest that's detrimental to us. Right.
Not just kill them, yeah?
Not just kill, destroying, repelling. Yeah. So it's you can see it's a very broad
Yeah.
definition, and it can include a lot of things. Also, you can look at pesticides and what they kill. So there's So when you hear the word pesticide, it's kind of a broad term. So also with pesticides, they encompass herbicides, which kill plants. Insecticides kill insects. Rodenticides, miticides, there's all hundreds of different kinds. So I hear a lot of times people will go, well, I don't use any pesticides, but I have Roundup. Well, that's sort of, they're not saying that right, because herbicides are a type of pesticide. So pesticide, broad term, it can encompass a lot of different, more specific things. And apart from what they kill, there's other categories that could be assigned. So like I mentioned earlier, so there's restricted materials. And these are pesticides that are more toxic to human health and the environment. And they have restrictions associated with them. So you have to get a special permit to spray them. You can only spray them at certain times of the year. You can't spray them at certain times of the year. So things like that. So they're more tightly regulated than other pesticides. And then there's the exempt products.
What do the asterisks mean?
Asterisks mean, I think that's my cue to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the exempt products, you see these a lot probably. They're the oils, all the clove oil, lemongrass oil. So these products are actually exempt from registration requirements. So they do not have to be registered with the EPA. Now, that being said, these products are still considered pesticides, okay? So if someone had an employee that was using these, they would still have to train that employee. They'd still have to provide the proper PPE required by regulation. They would not have to report the use because it's not a registered pesticide, okay?
So, question here.
Yeah.
How do you manage violations of that? I mean, I guess it would only be on spot checks or something. I mean, there are plenty of people that don't have employees that use neem or other oils, and they're not wearing the garb. And
If it's you mean if it's like the owner that's doing that, then they don't have to.
it's only with employees.
Yeah, and I'll go into that in more detail of what laws are required in what situations. But yeah, the short of it is if it's the owner operator that's doing the spraying, they basically have to only follow the label. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then organic pesticides, right? These are the OMRI approved, so these are ones that you can use for organic production. So I guess my point is with this is the word pesticide carries with it a lot of there's a lot of usage with it, and it can mean a lot of different things. So that handout I gave you, it'll go into a little more detail about what is a pesticide, and that's put out by DPR. Any other questions on that? Oh. So I'm just going to jump into some of the laws that were mandated to enforce. And the first one, I'm going to start with the federal laws. And all federal pesticide laws are regulated by the EPA. And the first main act is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA for short. We call it FIFRA. And this provides the broad legislative framework to regulate at the federal level. So
you guys go around going riffra, riffra, like Red Brown. You know, that's what I'm thinking about. It's great.
You know, actually, don't go in. I don't look at FIFRA too much, but FIFRA. Yeah. So this talks about things like registration, how to register pesticides, the sale and use of pesticides, fees, penalties for certain violations. But more importantly is this law gives states the authority to regulate the use of pesticides. So California gets its authority to make its own pesticide laws from this act here. And then the second main one is the Worker Protection Standard, or WPS. And this is the federal code that outlines the requirements of employers of what they have to do for their employees in regards to safety. So it talks about things like the training, what topics do you have to cover when you're training your handlers and field workers, medical requirements, personal protective equipment, regulations on what they have to wear when they're spraying, decontamination. So all these are outlined in the worker protection standard. So then now for the state pesticide laws, these are all administered by Department of Pesticide Regulation, DPR. Pretty well-known agency. And this, like the federal code, the Food and Ag Code, this provides the legislative framework to regulate at the state level, okay? So it defines things like food, insect, pesticide, kind of big, broad words. So this is where those words get defined. It's in this code. It talks about licensing and permitting, different types of violations, how much you get fined for certain violations, how to register pesticides at the state level, and then once again fees for different license types and permits. And then there's the code of regulations. And when we're out doing inspections, a lot of the codes that we're looking at are within this set of laws here. It's the California Code of Regulations. And so this starts to get a little more specific for things. So like for definitions, right? Closed system, field capacity. It's kind of more it's more specific terms start to get defined in this. Talks about environmental protection, specific requirements for certain pesticides, and like I just talked about, the worker protection standard. All the worker health and safety is in this code section here, and we call it the 6700 series because it starts with 6700 and it goes down. So when we're out on inspections, like I said, this is the nitty gritty here. We're looking at a lot of worker health and safety stuff on those inspections. So just briefly, this outlines the relationship between California law and federal law. So as you probably know that when the feds specifically when the feds will make a change to a pesticide law, California has to adopt that, and if it hasn't already adopted that, they need to change their code to match that. So it can never be less strict than the federal code. Okay?
Nice.
Yeah. It can never be less strict. So, but it can always be. It has to be as strict or more strict, and you'll find that with pesticide. It's in this box here with California. California has some of the most strict pesticide laws in the nation. Okay, so requirements. This is going to be the bulk of the talk. Yeah.
So before we get into the book of the talk, I have a question that's kind of off subject but on subject. How does the Right to Farm Act influence or not influence all of this?
Well, I'm not sure. This like specifically the pesticide stuff. Well, it actually.
Because with
doesn't.
drifting and that kind of thing, we're like if you're agriculture on the edge of residential,
Yeah.
or you could even bring in the GMO, non-GMO situation in that, I guess. But the reason I ask is here, well, in many counties, but not all of them, they're claiming that the Right to Farm Act doesn't apply to cannabis. And so I'm curious to understand how the Right to Farm Act applies to pesticides.
Well,
But if you don't know, I can ask.
so as far as I know, DPR is considering cannabis an agricultural commodity.
That's right.
Now, right, so you're saying why is DPR considering it an ag commodity, but it's not being considered an ag commodity between other agencies? I'm not sure. But I mean, as far as we're concerned,
Boards.
yeah, as far as we're concerned, the whole, I mean, the cannabis growers are going to follow all the pesticide laws. They have to, yeah.
And I think the right to farm law. I have a lot of attorneys asking me right now. I think there's going to be a lawsuit, statewide lawsuit on this because I know here that was my first thing, the right to farm a nuisance. When the state made it an agricultural commodity, and they are like, oh, it doesn't apply to cannabis.
But the
How does it?
CDFA considers it an agricultural product instead of a commodity. Right. And that's why
Yeah.
there's no right to farm.
And it's in the, well, and also, and it's in the B&P code. It's not in the Food and Ag
Well,
code.
that's the answer I've been given. There are a lot of attorneys that disagree with that statement. It's not my fight, so I don't
Yeah.
know. But I'm just curious how right to farm, if a pesticide flows onto a neighboring property, whether it's a farm or a residence or whatever, does the right to farm exempt any kind of,
For other crops?
yeah,
No.
or people's health?
See,
No.
like this influences the right to farm, right? It's like you have the right to farm, but you have to farm within the parameters set by DPR.
Right.
Right. It's not.
So
Now, there are-
what if you're farming within the parameters set by DPR and this still happens? Does wind,
Well, then that's
That's
if
where
there's
we-
drift or something. That's when we enforce the
Yeah.
pesticide laws.
Yeah.
Right.
so how does that work then, you guys? How does that enforce? I mean, what's the penalty?
We go and if someone calls and says I got drifted on, we go out and we do an investigation. And if we find evidence that that farmer drifted on someone, they'll get a fine.
They will.
Yeah.
Right? They don't say it's the wind and we have no control over it.
No, they do have control over it.
Yeah, they have to pay attention to the wind
Yeah, that's the law.
before they apply.
Protection of
Okay.
persons, animals, property is a law that
Good.
generally they have to, they need to be looking at the environment.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
So in the law, if it's windy, you can't spray basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can't drift. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't drift off your property.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Good, good, good.
So for the requirements, there's going to be 4 topics. So first one's going to be licensing and certification. We'll go over 4 different types, who needs what, when. Then we're going to go over permitting, what's known as the operator ID. And then training, the 2 different types of training, the handlers and the field workers. And then the pesticide operations. So like PB, decon, labeling, things like that. So before we get into that, I kind of want to make the point is that pesticide use isn't, the laws aren't always a one-size-fits-all type of deal. Your situation is going to determine what laws are going to kick in that you have to follow. So for instance, so you could ask yourself, do you have employees that handle pesticides? If you don't, then there's a whole set of laws that don't apply to you. Okay, but if you do, that's when that 6700 series worker health and safety laws kick in. Okay, so that's going to determine what you have to follow. Are you a pest control business or just a property operator? If you're a pest control business getting work for hire, controlling pests for hire, you need to get a pest control business license. What types of pesticides do you use? Are you using restricted materials, organophosphates, carbamates? Does the pesticide require a respirator? All different regulations kick in when you're using certain things. Who's training who? Are you a qualified trainer? Did you get your employees trained by a qualified trainer? What is a qualified trainer? So it's these questions you need to kind of ask yourself, and then when you figure that out, you'll have a better idea of what laws will kick in, what you need to follow. So licensing, certification. There's 4 main types. I didn't go over the PCA license just because it's not super. These ones are the main ones that are more important. So the first one's the private applicator certificate, or the PAC card. or we also call it the TAN card. And these are for growers that are running their own operations, and they either want, so if you get this card, you can buy restricted materials, and this card gives you the ability to train your employees. You're considered a qualified trainer when you have this card for field workers and handlers.
But only of your own, or can you train others?
You can train others. So it's only for production agriculture. Okay. So this TAN card, you can't take this TAN card and go work for, say, a maintenance gardener. It only counts for production ag. Okay. Yeah, but you could train, if you had this card, you could train someone else's employees on a different farm. Or if you wanted to send your employee to get this card, take the test, they would be considered trained at that point. Okay. This is the most common one we're seeing. I mean, this is the one that it's most applicable to cannabis growers. Then the second one is the Qualified Applicator Certificate, or the QAC. And this is for anyone who is using pesticides or supervising the use of pesticides other than production ag. So, like I said, for instance, maintenance gardeners, they have to get a QAC card. And also wineries, when they do SO2, they have to have a QAC as well. But this can also count for production ag as well. So if someone had this, they could go to a farm and be considered a qualified trainer.
Oh yeah, okay, great.
So then the third one is what's called the QAL, or the Qualified Applicator's License. And this is a harder license to get. And this is for, if you want to get a pest control business license, in order to get that license, you have to have a qualified applicator's license first.
Do all the employees have to have that, or just
No, just the owner. One person has to have it. It's generally the owner. Yeah, it's basically for people that are overseeing large operations, lots of employees. You have to get you have to get 40 hours of continuing ed, whereas the other ones you have to get 20. So a lot more in depth. Like the test is harder, more expensive. And the last one is the Pest Control Business License, or PCB license.
Right.
And this is for anyone who, if you're getting hired to do pest control, if you're getting killed to pay if you're getting paid to kill pests, then you need to get this license. Okay. So for example, like all the vineyard management companies, they have to get this license, and landscape maintenance as well.
So I know the Farm Bureau offers continuing education. Does the county offer continuing?
Yeah, so we have a grower class every year. It's 2 hours of 2 hours of laws and regs. Okay, so then for permitting, I kind of changed this talk a little bit. I talked about restricted material permits too, but I figured I shouldn't even get into that since they can't use it anyway. So the main one is what's called the operator identification number. And anyone that's producing an ag commodity and they're using pesticides on that, they have to get an operator ID, and they have to report the use of that pesticide to us.
Now, do they have to take a class to do continuing education on that?
No, this is just, the only thing they have to take the test is the PAC card. Yeah, and this is free, and you just have to make an appointment. We'll set you up with one. And it's basically just a mechanism to report your pesticide use. That's all it is. It's not any kind of permit that you have to get for you to even to spray the pesticide.
So that one isn't in there, right? That slide isn't in here.
No, that should be. That should be in there. Permitting. Yeah, so that's kind of that's a point of confusion sometimes. People think they actually have to get this to be able to spray. I mean, that's technically kind of right, but you have to get this because you need to report your use. That's why you need to get this. And like I said, remember, you only need to report registered pesticides. So all those exempt products, all the oils, citric acid, you wouldn't have to report that because there's no EPA reg number. Okay.
I think there was some confusion because at one point that was being talked about that.
But neem does have an EPA reg number, right?
Yeah, it should.
Besides the leaf polish?
Yeah. Okay, so any other questions on that? Just kind of throwing out a lot of stuff here. Okay, so then we're going to talk about training now. And there's two main types of training that you can give your employees. And the first one is what's called field worker training. So a field worker means any person for any kind of compensation performs cultural activities in a treated field. Now underline asterisk treated field. So what that means is if you apply pesticides to your crop, you're done, you apply it. 30 days after that point, that field's considered treated. Now if you have people working in that field, they have to be trained with field worker training. Okay? This also applies to greenhouses and hoop houses as well. So, for example, right, so people are going and leafing, pulling leaves, tying, they're in contact with that plant, with the residue on it.
Mm-hmm.
They need to have this training. And it has to be done by a qualified trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the topics covered, some of the same stuff, so decontamination, emergency medical care information, where to go, what's the hospital's phone number if someone gets sick, how to recognize symptoms of pesticide poisoning, the location of the app-specific info, what was sprayed, where and when, how much of it was sprayed, and also employees' rights, because employees are subject to you can't retaliate, the employer can't retaliate against their employee for saying that they got sick or thinking that they got sick. This is what the form looks like, the field worker training form. And we have if you have any clients that want to get copies of these, we have copies of all this.
Great.
So you can see it has all the topics here you need to cover. So you put the name of the trainer, you go through each topic, and people would print their name, sign it, and then they're trained. Now this is every year, this is annual. It used to be every 5 years, but the field worker training changed to every year. So the second type of training is the pesticide handler training. Now a handler means any person who mixes, loads, transfers, applies, or assists in applying pesticides. Okay, so it's the person doing the spraying. And there's more topics to cover. There's a lot more topics to cover than the field worker. Can you think of the reason why there'd be more topics?
Because they're utilizing the substances themselves. So you need storage, how you mix, could be chemical reactions, all sorts of adjunct issues.
Yeah, what are they doing? What are they handling at this point? And they're handling it's the concentrated product.
Right.
That's why it's at this point when they're mixing with that concentrate, that's the most dangerous point in the whole process, is because if any of that concentrate gets in your eyes, I mean, the diluted product can hurt you too, but if any of that concentrate gets on your skin, you swallow any of that, that's where the damage can really be done. So it's at this point where safety and emergency medical care training is really important.
Right, especially for chemical burns and things like that.
Yep, exactly. So some of the topics covered, reading the label, and we're actually going to go through a label in a second here. Protective clothing, equipment, PPE, routes of pesticide exposure, what ways a pesticide can get into the body, how to triple rinse containers, decontamination once again, and also symptoms of pesticide poisoning.
I'm just curious,
Mm-hmm.
what do you do with the rinse?
You put it into the container.
I mean, once you dump it back out again, is it considered a pesticide if you're rinsing out the container?
Yeah, so you triple rinse, right? And you're putting that rinsate into your spray tank.
Right.
So you're using it all. So you're saying, what is the rinsate considered?
Yes.
Pesticide?
Yes.
That's still considered product, yeah. And you have to take that and you're putting it because it's diluted. Mm-hmm. So when you're putting it into your spray tank that you're going to be spraying.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And then you spray it.
Then you spray. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then is that considered a contaminated field or a treated field?
Mm-hmm. 30 days after you spray.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to articulate.
Mm-hmm. So this is what the handler training form looks like. You can see it's a little more in depth. And basically, it's the same thing. Each employee gets his or her own sheet. You go through each topic, initial it, and one of the differences with the handler training is you have to go over each specific pesticide that they are using. So say your employees are using 3 different types of pesticides. You have to list those here. Then you have to go over the specifics of that pesticide. So you have to go over the label of neem oil. You have to go over the safety procedures specifically for neem oil. And this is every year as well. This is an annual training. And these records, this is what we look for when we do headquarters. These are the kind of things we're looking for. Do you have updated training records? Do you have updated pesticide use records? And if you don't have that, if you don't have updated records, and we find out that employees have been spraying, we can cease that operation until you actually get them trained. And possibly a fine.
And then if you can use your prompt because you did that.
Mm-hmm. So now, kind of on the home stretch here, the pesticide operations. So first off is the pesticide storage. Containers have to be secure. They have to be in a locked either building or cabinet. The storage area needs to be posted. Now, it only needs to be posted if you have warning or danger materials. If you just have caution materials, then it doesn't have to be posted, technically. Now, we do encourage people to post any kind of pesticide storage area. But if we came out and you just had caution material and you didn't have it posted, we couldn't legally give you a violation for that. We do encourage it though. Containers have to have the original label with it, and you have to keep pesticides in their original containers, so no Gatorade bottles or water bottles and things like that. It's actually a big portion of the pesticide illnesses are people putting it in and kids drinking it and stuff like that. So read the label. And you're going to hear me say this a lot the rest of the talk, is the label is the law. The label is the law. Always going to make it a habit to read the label of every pesticide that you're using before you use it, to know what are the safety procedures, what you have to wear, and things like that. But always read the label. And in your packet, we actually have a label that we're going to go through. We're going to look at this information that's on there and see where you find it. And it should be in the back of the packet. Or maybe it's in the front. Where after those few pages. The next one, I think. Yeah, right there.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so the label, there's a lot of information on the label. And it could seem kind of overwhelming if you don't know how to read it. But generally, they're usually set up in the same way, and the information's kind of in the same areas. So if you know how to read it, you know what you're looking for, you can find things quickly. So the first thing it's always going to tell you is what the product can be used on. So if you look at this Eagle 20 here, you look right under the name, it says systemic protectant, curative fungicide for disease control of established turf grass, landscape ornamentals, greenhouse and nursery ornamentals, apples, stone fruits, and grapes. Okay, so I already know what this product can be used on from that little paragraph right there. Okay, can't use it on lettuce. If you use it on lettuce, then that's a label violation. So then the next thing is
And a label violation is
you're using
fine violation.
it could be a fine, yeah, depends. So if it's an egregious one, it could be it could get quite expensive. So so after that, if you look to the active ingredient, it'll be right below what we just read. So what's the active ingredient in this?
Microbutanol.
Mm-hmm. So in what situation would this be an important piece of when would this be an important piece of information?
In every instance, in my opinion.
Yes.
When somebody gets poisoned.
Yeah, so like if you're taking someone to the hospital
Right.
and you're calling and the doctor says, well, they're going to want to know, they might want to know the product, but specifically they're going to want to know that active.
Yeah.
So that's going to
how
help
they
them,
treat it, yeah.
help them treat it, yeah. So then if you go down to the bottom left, you're going to see the EPA reg number down there in little tiny font. So that's going to be important if someone was using this and they needed to report their use. They're going to put in that EPA reg number. The signal word. So like I said when I was talking about danger, warning, and caution, there's three types of signal words. So this one is a caution. So if you were storing this in a shed, would you have to post?
No, but you recommend it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we wouldn't be able to give a violation
Right.
if you did. Yeah, good. Generally, caution signifies least hazard, warning, a little bit more hazardous, danger, the worst hazard. So then, an important, you'll see personal protective equipment down from the signal word. And this is going to tell you what you have to wear when you're using this product. So what do you have to wear if you're an applicator or a handler?
Eye protection and a suit.
Or so under PPE, so long sleeve shirt, long pants, chemical resistant gloves made of barrier laminate, and shoes plus socks. Okay. Now this is what you have to wear according to this label. Now there's also, I'm going to talk about it in another slide. There's also, if you're an employee that's using pesticides, you also have to always wear two other items. You have to always wear protective eyewear and chemical resistant gloves, which in this case it says you have to wear chemical resistant gloves anyway. Now, if you are an owner-operator, you don't have to do that. You don't have to wear those goggles and gloves. But do you have to follow the label?
Yes.
Yes, because everyone has to follow the label. Correct. Now the employees have to follow the label and they have to follow those regulations too. Okay. So that's PPE. That's always an important one. That's one of the first things we look for when we see a pesticide application. When we go look at the label, we go see what they're supposed to be wearing. First aid, that's at the bottom right there. It's going to tell you, yeah.
And you can wear a suit instead of long pants. I mean, you can be
Yes.
more protective.
Yes,
than-
absolutely. So the first aid, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to tell you what you need to do. Get it in your eyes, swallow, get it on your skin. Environmental hazards, it's going to be on the next page, page 2. This is going to be where it tells you what you can't, where you can't spray it. So what can't you do? Where shouldn't you spray this one? Directly to water. So basically stay away from areas with water. That we talked about earlier, don't apply when weather conditions favor drift. So if it's windy, so you always got to be looking if it's windy or not. And so I say read the label. So if you look under that, when it says notice, see, even on the label, it tells you to read the entire label. That's how important that is. See that? See, it's like a circular thing. So on the label, it's telling you to read the entire label.
Where are you looking?
Under environmental hazards, notice.
Got it.
Yeah.
Read the entire label.
That's my semi-pesticide joke, I always tell. So then after environmental hazards, restricted entry interval. And that's going to be under agricultural use requirements. Now, the restricted entry interval is the time where you can't, after you spray, there can be no one in that field for that amount of time. So what's the REI for this one?
24 hours.
Whole day. So no one can be in that field for a whole day. Unless you wanted to do early entry, PPE requirements, which it lists what you have to wear for that. Now, what we generally see, we don't see guys sending their guys in during that REI.
Well, it's just better.
It's better. It could get. If we
There's
see,
liability.
liability. If we see that as the ag department, we're driving by, we're gonna go, even if they're wearing the right stuff, it's just kind of guys don't even deal with it. So then it goes on to talk about other stuff, storage, disposal, mixing directions, things like that. So now, after going through this, can this be used on cannabis?
No,
How come?
because it's not on the list.
It's not on the
DPR list.
well, specifically from this label.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not listed in that first
Yeah.
group. Yeah, it's not turf grass, landscape ornamentals, so it doesn't fall within that. It's pretty specific in what it says you can use this on. Okay.
Are there any pesticides yet that California has determined to be used on cannabis? I helped create the original list. I've lost track of all of them.
Right, and after the talk, I'll talk to you in more detail about what's kind of going on with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we kind of went over this already a little bit. So personal protective equipment. This is going to vary depending on the label and what you're using. But if you're an employee and if you're an employer and you have an employee spraying, they always have to have these items: is protective eyewear, chemical resistant gloves. They have to be at least 14 mils thick. So that's a good note to write down. Always. So if the label said you don't have to wear anything, right?
You still have
to wear those. You still have to wear those two things, exactly. Now, do you have to wear this if you're even using an exempt product?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because it's still a pesticide. Now, the owners don't have to wear these, but they do have to follow the label. So you see, there's multiple. It takes a little while to learn. There's multiple layers to this.
Like
Yeah.
cannabis in that way.
Yeah. So just an example of kind of what it looks like on a label. It'll always kind of be in this format. So what's wrong with this picture?
many things.
So tell me, give me some, what do you see wrong? After all we just talked about, what's...
Well, I haven't read the label, but her, she doesn't have gloves or protective eyewear, and she most likely needs long sleeves and pants, but I don't know that because I haven't read the label.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually good. I like that you said that, because that's a good way to think. You haven't read the label yet.
Right.
So you don't actually know exactly what's required of that, but you said you do know that she's not wearing the eyewear, she's not wearing the... Most likely the label's going to require long sleeve shirt, long pants. I haven't seen any labels that don't require that. Yeah. No gloves. I like how she's wearing the mask, but she doesn't have it over her face. It's like...
I see that all the time.
Yeah. A suspicious Pepsi bottle there, I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, so if we rolled up and saw this, we'd stop it right away until she could get what she needed. And this would probably be a fine.
What are the fines range?
So
What's the minimum and maximum fine?
the maximum is if someone got hurt. So it has to deal with so there's 3 different categories. So there's category A, that's if someone actually got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
There's a category B, that's if something happened where someone could have gotten hurt. So if you didn't train someone, no one did get hurt, but if you didn't train someone and they sprayed, that's considered a B. They could have gotten hurt from that. And then there's a category C, which is basically just paperwork, use reports. They didn't turn in the use reports. So a C is $50 to, oh man, I haven't looked at these in a while. $50 to $400. A B is $400 to $1,000.
Per occurrence?
Per violation.
Per violation.
Yeah. And then a type A is, don't quote me on this, it's up to $5,000. Up to $5,000, I think. I have it in my rigs. It gets expensive. So if like 3 people got hurt, you could potentially be up to tens of thousands of dollars. And if it's something with intent, sometimes when there's intent involved, with someone hurting someone, then that can even get into criminal things.
So if you spray during the wind and the spray injures someone, would that be intent or non-intent?
Well, you'd have to do the investigation. I mean, most likely,
it wouldn't automatically be intent.
No, but that would be treated as an A violation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now there's also
it would be more like if 2 people got in a fight at work and somebody sprayed them with Roundup.
I heard.
Yeah, that's happened.
I'm sure it has. I have no doubt in my mind. But my thinking was intent from the perspective of you know better and you did it anyway.
Yeah, and that could be tough to determine sometimes. But yeah, I mean, if someone tells you, it's like, yeah, I knew it was windy and I just went ahead and did it anyway. That would just be things that would be hashed out in the investigation. Most of the time, people don't. People are pretty good. They don't try not to do that. So hazard communication, this is, so whether you have field workers or handlers, you have to have what's called, they're called the A8s and A9s, Pesticide Safety Information Series, available on site for your employees. And these are just, they're kind of quick grab packets with information on worker health and safety, medical care, symptoms of poisoning, things like that. Mm-hmm. This is what they look like. So this is one of the laws that we look for, one of the requirements for an inspection. So if you see this little portion here, where it says emergency medical care, the employer has to have that filled out. If they don't have it filled out,
I just heard.
Oh, sorry. If the employer doesn't have this filled out properly, that's a violation. And it's usually easily fixable on site.
That's paperwork C violation?
Ooh, okay. You're starting to think about things. So
well, I know that I've been in farming for freaking 40 years.
Yes. So it depends. It depends, because you could almost say that could be a B violation, where if you didn't have that information available to them,
so
it could hurt.
Potential
To
It's
hurt.
going to be both.
Now, if you had, so some guys actually have the hospital phone number posted elsewhere.
Uh-huh.
So if we actually saw that, then I would say at this point, not having this filled out probably would be a C. But if you had no other hospital number, yeah.
That sounds fair.
Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of stuff that you kind of have to look for. And that's why I said these laws can get kind of convoluted sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, so is it that interpretation that makes that?
For some interpretation. So the next thing is the application specific information, and this is just what you have to have on site. You have to have the detailed information on the application. And it's for employees or inspectors to see what was sprayed, how much, when you applied it, where. And this has to be updated for the past 30 days. So if you make an application, you have to write all that information down and have it in a central location for any employee to go look at when they want to. Decontamination. This is an important regulation. There's 3 items always required for decontamination, whether it's field workers or handlers. And you need clean water, single-use towels, and soap. And if you're also applying pesticides, you also need a change of coveralls. So for soap, hand sanitizers, wet towelettes don't count. That was one of the changes in the worker protection standard. You actually have to have soap. And for the water, for field workers, you need 1 gallon per field worker at the start of the day. For handlers, you need 3 gallons per handler. So 3 handlers need at least 9 gallons. If you have a hose, that counts. That counts as your water.
So field worker 1 gallon.
Handler 3.
Handler 3.
Mm-hmm. And you just do the math from there.
Right.
So respiratory protection. You have to have a respiratory program when there's these situations. So if a respirator is required by the label, you have to have a respiratory program. If it's required by a regulation, or if it's required by the employer. So if the employer has their own policy where they require a tight fitting respirator, they get they are automatically kicked in to have that respiratory program. And the components of that are having a written program. So you have to outline who's the person administering that, who's keeping track of all
Do you have
fit testing.
county forms for that?
We do have I think we have a example of what that would look like. Yeah. So you have to have fit test records. So tight fitting respirators, you have to send your employees to get fit tested.
Who's qualified to fit test?
There are a few companies around here that do it, and that can
So
give
it
you.
has to be a company.
I actually I'll have to check on that of what actually who is qualified to do that. But it's like people like MVP and Seika.
Yeah.
I think they're qualified to do that.
But I'm
so let me check on that though, because I actually think that the employer can do that too.
Yeah, I think
Right. Well, let me ask Andy. Do you know how you have to be qualified to do fit testing? Can the employer just do that?
Yes. Well, you mean if you like it like a self kit? You can buy
And a respiratory protection program.
Yes, you can buy kits that tell you how to do it for different tests because there's 2, right? There's the fit and there's also the vape. Can you smell that?
Yeah.
The oil.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the employer can administer that. Yeah.
Then another part of it is the medical evaluations, and so you have to actually send your employees to make sure that they're healthy enough to be able to use a respirator, and proper inspection and storage. Right? So you have to be storing.
Does it need a medical doctor, or can like an assistant do that medical evaluation?
It has to be a medical doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah. People usually they go to job care.
Job care is good.
Yeah. So what I would suggest is.
Oh, God, sorry, just one more question.
Yeah.
Does it have to be an MD, or can it be like an acupuncturist or chiropractor?
It has to be someone, physician's assistant, MD, someone with
It can be a physician's assistant.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Right, because they're pretty much doctors.
They can write prescriptions.
Like Matt was saying, a lot of the conventional ag guys would send their employees to job care or somewhere to get that.
Yeah,
fit
in the
testing done.
cannabis industry, they typically use alternative doctors, so that's what I was asking.
Yeah, that's not gonna work.
So I guess so. After going through this, I would suggest if you are not using any pesticides that require a respirator, if you want to make your life easier, another option is what's called, so if you wanted to supply the dust mist masks, what you do is called a voluntary use display, and it's a piece of paper that you hang up, and it's got some language on it saying, we have these masks available for employees to use, stored here, blah, blah, blah.
Voluntary
Use display.
uses.
Yeah,
Like
but
that.
because if you require your employee, if it's a policy, you're getting kicked into a whole world
Another level.
of there's like 8 pages of regulations for respiratory. So now, I mean, if you're using something that requires it, then you don't really have a choice. But if you do have the choice, a lot of people do that option, the voluntary use display.
That would probably be easier.
Yes, very much so.
So that's what I'm going to be recommending, because I used to be a primary care physician as an acupuncturist, and to me, anything in the air that isn't oxygen and carbon dioxide is not healthy. So, prevention is 100% healthcare in my opinion.
And so, last but not least, so you want to be looking at your environment, as we were talking about earlier. Always be looking at your environment. Is it windy? Is the pesticide going to drift? Always have to be looking at drifts. What's the temperature like? There's certain pesticides where you can't apply it at above a certain temperature because it could be phytotoxic to the plants. Is it going to rain? Is there a lot of dew outside? There's some pesticides don't allow you to apply when it's rain within a 24-hour forecast.
What about morning dew? I have not seen that before. I haven't seen a morning dew warning.
Well, you have to kind of think about how the plant's gonna. It might not be an explicit warning, but you want to think about how, if the plants are kind of wet, how that product is gonna, how it's gonna stick to that plant.
Right.
So, general rain, moisture, inversion layer. There's an inversion layer. That product, the plume could stick under that layer and drift potentially and not dissipate. So that's something you have to look out for. Do you have neighbors? Do you have any neighbors? Do you have a lot of neighbors? Is it, windy, and is it going to blow on your neighbors? Do your neighbors know what you're using? It's kind of good to have a good rapport with and have them know kind of what your situation is. You next to a water source, lake, stream, are you on a hill? Is there potential for runoff, right? And always remember to read the label.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
If you have a pesticide that you're applying, and I take vineyards for instance, that is danger, and you're next to a class 3 stream, which is like a ditch, and it's, not damp at the moment, but a week later because it's 30 days, right? A week later there's a unexpected rain, or, a week and a half later there's an unexpected rain, which then would carry whatever drift was in the ditch down to wherever. How do you manage that? How does that scenario look upon?
So you're asking if there was any drift into that ditch.
Yeah.
How do we prevent?
And then it rains a week later, unexpectedly.
Well,
is that a violation? How does that look upon?
no, I mean, so there's only there's only so much we can kind of do, right?
I get it.
I would say probably the amount that's drifting, if it's not windy, the amount of drift that would get in there is probably very minimal, So at that point, if it did rain and it, washed, it would be a minimal amount, but I mean, they're technically not drift. I mean, it's not like major drift,
Right.
like into a major body
I just
of
wanted to
water.
understand where that line's kind of drawn.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to remember. I mean, when people are dealing with pesticides, there's always going to be some kind of uncertainty and
Of course, there's
Yeah.
a variable.
there's
More than
variables
one.
that you can't predict, and it's usually the amount is
Key.
very, if it's trace amounts, it's usually considered. I don't want to say it's considered okay, but it's not like
It's not as detrimental.
yeah, it's not like if you actually the tank was leaking,
Yeah,
and spilling
or
into
something,
it, and actually going down the river. So
Well, there was no water is what I'm thinking.
yeah,
Because, Waterworth and these class 3 streams, they see it a little differently. They don't want any chemicals or pesticides 50 feet from them. So if you're 50 feet and you're spraying, I'm just trying to understand where the county and the Department of Pesticide Regulations at versus what quality is at on that.
yeah. I don't think DPR has any explicit distances. I think what their laws are mainly, you have to have them stored
Yeah.
in a
storage.
lockable, where if it spills, it's not
Secondary.
going to secondary. Yeah, exactly. You definitely can't store them outside.
Right.
Yeah. So
So it sounds like there's a big gap there. I'm not trying to say anything's wrong, but there are some extreme situations. I'm thinking out loud. Sorry.
okay. So any other questions? We've talked about a
This
lot.
is very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, in case, you've probably been to DPR's website, but just in case, there's a lot of great resources there. They also have all their laws and regs listed on a whole page there. And pesticide safety study guide, you got it right there, right next to you. So,
I give them out for free to my clients.
okay, awesome.
Yeah. It's just I think it's necessary. I'm very much into being proactive, and because farming is a constantly changing thing. The weather's you never know what's going to happen, and so from my perspective, people need to be educated so that they can manage themselves properly.
Absolutely.
So that's why I did that.
Great. Thanks for coming, Julia.
Thank
Thank you,
you
guys.
for that.